third-rate reporters didn't see it because they didn't look. You're a third-rate reporter, always have been. So third-rate reporters didn't look, but anybody that asked, these pictures have been in newspapers. They've been all over the place, and you know, we're very proud of it. It's gotten great reviews. It's gotten really great reviews. So I think we've been more transparent than anybody's ever been.
Just changing this topic slightly, I see you've got the model of the White House and the ballroom. Many people were surprised the entire East Wing is being demolished because you had said initially that the ballroom would just touch or would not.
Well,
touch
certain
it.
areas
What
certain areas are being left. We determined that after really a tremendous amount of study with some of the best architects in the world, we determined that really knocking it down, trying to use a little section. You know, the East Wing was not much. There was not much left from the original. It was over the course of 100 years, it was changed. The columns were removed, and it was a much different building. Then a story was added on in 1948, 1949.
Okay, so Donald Trump just had what might be the most unhinged courtroom meltdown we've ever seen. And trust me, that's saying something. We're talking full-on screaming at a federal judge, losing his mind in front of everyone, all because prosecutors just dropped a bombshell that his own lawyers have been hiding evidence. Yeah, evidence that could literally send him to prison. And here's the kicker. This isn't some random lawsuit about money or business deals. This is the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case. You know, the one where he allegedly took boxes and boxes of America's most sensitive secrets to his country club? That one. And now we're finding out that his legal team, the people who are supposed to be defending him, might have been covering stuff up the whole time. Like, can you believe this? The man stood up in court, according to multiple witnesses, and literally screamed that he is above the law at a judge in a federal courtroom. This is real life, people. This actually happened on October 22nd, just a few days ago. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
And rather than allowing that to hurt a very expensive, beautiful building that, frankly, they've been after for years, you have that. I brought these along so people could see, but it's, you know, there's a relative, nobody's actually seen anything quite like it. I think it'll be one of the great ballrooms anywhere in the world. It's about $300 million. It's set to do many, many things, including meetings of foreign leaders, including the honoring of foreign leaders. You can see this. This is a plan. If it's got tables so that you honor a foreign leader, we have a proper space. Right now, we have a space that with tables holds about 79 people.
And look, I know we've all gotten kind of numb to Trump drama at this point. Every week there's something new, right? But this is different, because what we're seeing isn't just Trump being Trump. What we're watching is a former president currently serving his second term, having an absolute breakdown because the walls are closing in. And those walls, they're built out of his own actions, his own decisions, and now his own lawyers' apparent attempts to hide the truth. So here's what happened. Trump's in court for a hearing related to the Mar-a-Lago case. Everything seems normal at first. Well, as normal as a Trump court appearance can be. But then prosecutors stand up and drop this absolute bomb. They tell the judge that Trump's defense team has been withholding critical evidence, internal communications, documents that should have been turned over months ago, stuff that apparently shows coordination, planning, maybe even deliberate obstruction. The judge, and you can imagine how this went. The judge immediately calls out Trump's lawyers, accuses them, right there in open court, of hiding evidence that's central to the entire case. And that's when Trump loses it. According to people who were actually in the courtroom, he started yelling, not just talking loud, screaming at the judge, the actual federal judge presiding over his case. Come on, what kind of person does that? What kind of lawyer lets their client do that? Because here's the thing, when you're already facing charges that could land you in federal prison, the absolute last thing you want to do is scream at the judge handling your case. That's like punching your doctor right before surgery. It makes no sense, but Trump did it anyway. And that quote, the one where he said he's above the law, That's not secondhand gossip. Multiple people heard it. Multiple witnesses who were sitting right there in the courtroom, and now it's everywhere. Every news outlet, every legal analyst, everyone's talking about how the former president, sitting president, technically just told the federal court that he thinks the rules don't apply to him. And you know what the worst part is? He might actually believe that after everything, after all the investigations, all the indictments, all the court cases, he still thinks he can just do whatever he wants, that laws are for other people, that judges work for him, not for justice. This comes right after another bombshell, by the way. Just days before this courtroom explosion, one of Trump's former attorneys broke down on the witness stand, like actually broke down, started admitting to concealing financial information, said they did it because of pressure from Trump's inner circle. So now we've got lawyers cracking under oath, lawyers hiding evidence, and Trump himself screaming at judges. This is wild, like genuinely wild, because what we're watching isn't just a legal battle anymore. It's a complete meltdown of Trump's entire defense strategy, and the timing could not be worse for him. We're heading into 2026 primaries. Republicans are trying to figure out their future. Independent voters are already nervous about all these legal problems. And then Trump goes and does this. Watchdog groups are now demanding that the Department of Justice investigate what they're calling a cover-up effort. They want to know what else is being hidden. What other documents are missing? Who else knew about it? And most importantly, was Trump directing this whole thing? Because if he told his lawyers to hide evidence, that's obstruction of justice. That's a whole new set of charges on top of everything else. So yeah, that's where we are. Trump screaming in court, lawyers admitting to crimes, evidence mysteriously disappearing, and the entire legal system trying to figure out what happens when a sitting president acts like he's above the law. Stay with me, because this story gets even crazier. Alright, so let's dig into what's actually happening here. Because most people, and I mean most people, don't really understand how insane this situation is. Like, the headlines make it sound dramatic, sure, but the details are absolutely bonkers. First, we need to talk about what evidence we're talking about. The prosecutors didn't just say, hey, you forgot to give us some papers. No, they specifically said that Trump's legal team withheld internal communications related to the classified documents case. Internal communications. That means emails, text messages, memos, stuff that shows what Trump and his team were saying to each other while all this was going down. And think about that for a second. If these communications were innocent, if they showed Trump doing nothing wrong, why would anyone hide them? You don't hide evidence that helps your case. You hide evidence that hurts your case. That's basic logic, right? So the fact that these communications were withheld tells us something really important. It tells us that someone, whether it's Trump or his lawyers or both, someone looked at these documents and decided they were too damaging to turn over. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't some administrative mistake where papers got lost in the shuffle. This was a deliberate choice to keep certain information away from prosecutors. But here's where it gets really complicated. Because in a criminal case, you can't just decide not to give evidence to prosecutors. There's this thing called discovery, where both sides have to share what they've got. It's supposed to prevent exactly this kind of thing. One side hiding the smoking gun while pretending they've been transparent the whole time. And if you violate discovery rules, that's serious. That can get you sanctioned, disbarred, even charged with obstruction. So when the judge accused Trump's lawyers of withholding critical evidence, that wasn't just a scolding. That was the judge saying you might have committed a crime. And Trump, instead of letting his lawyers handle it, instead of staying quiet like literally any competent legal advisor would tell him to do, he stood up and started screaming. Now, according to the accounts we have, Trump didn't just yell once and sit down. He went off, started ranting about how the whole case is rigged, how the prosecutors are corrupt, how he's being persecuted. Standard Trump stuff, honestly. But then he crossed the line. He said, and again, multiple people confirmed this, he said that he is above the law. Come on. You can't say that in a courtroom. You especially can't say that when you're literally on trial for allegedly breaking the law. It's like standing up in traffic court and telling the judge you don't have to follow speed limits because you're special. Except this isn't traffic court. This is federal court. And the charges aren't about speeding. They're about mishandling classified national security documents. And yeah, Trump's lawyers immediately tried to do damage control. They tried to walk it back, said he was emotional, said he didn't mean it the way it sounded. But here's the thing. You can't unring that bell. Everyone in that courtroom heard it. The judge heard it. The prosecutors heard it. And now the whole country's heard it because it's been reported everywhere. But let's talk about why this matters beyond just the optics, because it's not just about Trump looking bad or acting erratic. It's about what this reveals about his legal strategy or a complete lack of one. See, when you're facing serious criminal charges, you need to present a united, disciplined front. You need to show the court that you respect the process, that you're cooperating, that you're taking things seriously. Even if you think the charges are bogus, even if you genuinely believe you're innocent, you still need to play by the rules. Because judges don't like defendants who act like they're above the law. And juries definitely don't like defendants who scream at judges. So by doing what he did, Trump probably just made his situation exponentially worse. The judge is now going to be looking at everything his legal team does with extra suspicion. Every motion they file, every witness they call, every piece of evidence they submit, the judge is going to be wondering, are they hiding something else? That's not the position you want to be in when you're trying to beat federal charges. And then there's the attorney who broke down on the stand a few days before this. That's another massive problem for Trump. Because when one of your former lawyers starts admitting under oath that they concealed financial information because of pressure from your inner circle, that's bad. That's really, really bad. Think about what that means. It means someone in Trump's orbit, and let's be honest, probably Trump himself, was telling lawyers to hide stuff, was putting pressure on them to break their ethical obligations, and now that lawyer is cooperating with prosecutors, which means they're probably telling prosecutors everything. Every conversation, every instruction, every document they were told to make disappear. This is how these cases build momentum, by the way. It starts with one person cracking, one person deciding they're not going to jail for someone else's crimes, and then suddenly you've got a domino effect. Other people see that person cooperating and think, wait, why am I taking the fall for this? And then they flip too. And before you know it, the whole conspiracy unravels. And that's exactly what seems to be happening here. We've got lawyers admitting to concealment. We've got evidence surfacing that was supposed to stay hidden. We've got prosecutors building what looks like an obstruction case on top of the original classified documents case. And we've got Trump in the middle of it all, screaming at judges and acting like the rules don't apply to him. Now, some people will say this is all political, that the prosecutors are out to get Trump, that the whole thing is rigged, that this is just another witch hunt. And look, believe what you want to believe. But here's a simple question. If Trump did nothing wrong, if he handled those classified documents properly, if he cooperated with the government when they asked for them back, if he didn't tell his lawyers to hide evidence, then why is any of this happening? Because innocent people don't usually have their lawyers breaking down on the stand. Innocent people don't usually have evidence mysteriously withheld from prosecutors. And innocent people definitely don't stand up in federal court and scream about being above the law. The timing of all this is crazy too. We're in October 2025. Trump's in the middle of his second term. There are massive political implications to everything he does. And instead of trying to project strength and competence, instead of staying focused on governing, he's spending his time in courtrooms, dealing with one legal crisis after another, and it's taking a toll. Recent polling shows that independent voters, the people who kind of decide elections, are getting increasingly uncomfortable with all of Trump's legal problems. They're starting to wonder if maybe all this smoke means there's actually a fire. They're questioning whether someone with this many legal issues should be running the country. Republicans are nervous too. You've got GOP lawmakers who publicly support Trump, but privately, they're freaking out because they know that if Trump gets convicted, if he actually goes to trial and a jury finds him guilty, that's going to create absolute chaos, constitutional chaos, political chaos, maybe even actual chaos in the streets. And here's something else that's not getting enough attention. The Mar-a-Lago case isn't just about whether Trump took classified documents. It's about what he did with them afterward. It's about whether he obstructed the investigation when the government tried to get them back. And that obstruction piece, that's where things get really dangerous for Trump. Because even if you could argue, and I'm not saying you can, but even if you could argue that Trump somehow had the right to take those documents, you absolutely cannot argue that he had the right to hide them from investigators. You can't claim you had the right to tell your lawyers to conceal evidence. You can't say you had the right to pressure people into lying about what happened. And based on everything we're seeing now, the withheld communications, the lawyer breaking down on the stand, Trump's own courtroom behavior, it sure looks like that's exactly what happened. It looks like Trump and his team spent months trying to cover up what they did, trying to keep investigators from finding out the truth, trying to make evidence disappear. So that's where we are. Trump melting down in court, evidence surfacing, lawyers flipping, prosecutors circling, and the whole country watching to see what happens next. Because this isn't just another Trump controversy that'll blow over in a week. This is a federal criminal case with real stakes, real consequences, and a defendant who just told a judge he thinks he's above the law. Okay, so let's break this down into what actually matters. Because there's a lot of noise around this story, a lot of hot takes and speculation. But here are the core facts you need to understand. First, Trump's legal team withheld evidence. That's not in dispute anymore. The prosecutors said it, the judge called it out, and Trump's own reaction basically confirmed it. So we know that critical internal communications, Documents that should have been turned over during discovery were kept hidden, and that's a massive problem, because in a criminal case, you can't just decide what evidence to share and what evidence to bury. That's not how the justice system works. Second, Trump had a complete meltdown in response. When the judge confronted his lawyers about the withheld evidence, Trump didn't stay calm. He didn't let his attorneys handle it. He stood up and started screaming. And not just generic anger, he specifically said that he is above the law. In front of witnesses, in front of the judge, in front of prosecutors who are literally trying to prove he broke the law. And look, I don't care what your politics are. That's objectively insane behavior for someone in Trump's position. You're already facing serious federal charges. You're already dealing with multiple investigations. The absolute last thing you should be doing is giving prosecutors more ammunition. But that's exactly what Trump did. He gave them a soundbite that's going to show up in every legal filing, every court argument, every jury presentation from now until the end of this case. Third, this isn't happening in isolation. Remember, just days before this courtroom explosion, one of Trump's former attorneys broke down on the witness stand, started admitting to concealing financial information, said they did it because of pressure from Trump's inner circle. So now we've got a pattern. We've got multiple instances of evidence being hidden, of pressure being applied, of the truth being obscured. In that pattern, that's what prosecutors build cases on. They don't need to prove Trump personally shredded documents or deleted emails. They just need to prove that he created an environment where people felt like they had to hide things, where lawyers felt pressured to break their ethical rules, where the priority was protecting Trump rather than following the law. And based on what we're seeing, they might be able to prove exactly that. Fourth, watchdog groups are now demanding a full investigation into what they're calling a cover-up effort. These aren't random activists or partisan hacks. These are organizations that monitor government accountability, that track legal processes, that know what obstruction looks like. And they're saying this situation has all the hallmarks of a coordinated attempt to hide evidence and interfere with a federal investigation. So what happens next? Well, a few things. The judge in the Mar-a-Lago case is probably going to order a full accounting of what evidence was withheld and why. Trump's lawyers are going to have to explain themselves, possibly under oath. And depending on what comes out of that process, we could see sanctions against the defense team. We could see referrals for criminal prosecution. We could even see contempt charges against Trump himself if the judge decides his outburst crossed the line into disrupting court proceedings. But the bigger question is what this does to Trump's overall legal situation. Because he's not just dealing with the classified documents case. He's got multiple investigations, multiple trials, multiple legal fronts he's fighting on. And every time something like this happens, every time he melts down in court or evidence surfaces or a lawyer flips, it makes all of those other cases harder to fight. Prosecutors in other jurisdictions are watching this. They're seeing how Trump behaves under pressure. They're seeing how his defense strategy falls apart when the heat gets turned up. And they're probably thinking we can use this. They're probably looking for ways to introduce evidence of Trump's courtroom behavior, his attitude toward the law, his willingness to pressure people into hiding things. And then there's the political fallout. Because Trump is the sitting president, he's supposed to be focused on running the country. But instead, he's spending his time dealing with legal crises that are entirely of his own making. And voters are noticing, independent voters especially. The polling shows they're getting increasingly uncomfortable with the idea of a president who's constantly in court, constantly fighting criminal charges, constantly acting like the rules don't apply to him. Some Republicans are starting to whisper quietly because Trump still controls the base, but they're starting to whisper about what happens if this continues. What happens if Trump gets convicted while in office? What happens to the party? What happens to their electoral prospects? Because right now, Democrats are salivating at the idea of running against a criminally convicted president in 2026 and beyond. And here's the thing, this story isn't going away. We're not going to wake up tomorrow and find out it was all a misunderstanding. The evidence exists. The witnesses exist. The courtroom records exist. Trump actually said he is above the law in a federal courthouse. That happened. And now prosecutors and judges and the entire legal system have to figure out what to do about a sitting president who genuinely seems to believe he doesn't have to follow the same rules as everyone else. But let's talk about something that's not getting enough coverage. The psychological aspect of all this. Because Trump's behavior in that courtroom, that wasn't strategic, that wasn't calculated, that was pure emotional reaction. And that tells us something important about his state of mind right now. Think about it. Trump spent his entire life getting away with stuff. He's dodged consequences over and over again. Business failures, legal problems, scandals, nothing ever seems to stick. And I think that's created this mindset where he genuinely believes he's untouchable, where he thinks that if he just fights hard enough, if he just makes enough noise, if he just attacks the right people, he'll escape this too. But federal criminal charges, those are different. You can't just tweet your way out of them. You can't just fire the people investigating you. You can't just declare victory and move on. The system doesn't work that way. And I think Trump's finally starting to realize that, and it's making him desperate. That desperation is what we saw in the courtroom. That's why he screamed at the judge. That's why he said he was above the law. Because deep down, he knows the walls are closing in. He knows his lawyers are flipping. He knows evidence is surfacing. And he's lashing out because he doesn't know what else to do. So where does that leave us? It leaves us watching a slow motion, legal car crash. Trump's fighting on multiple fronts. His lawyers are flipping or admitting to crimes. Evidence keeps surfacing that was supposed to stay hidden. And he's responding to all of it by having public meltdowns and screaming at judges. Is this sustainable? Can Trump actually keep this up for the rest of his term? Can his legal team hold together when they're facing potential sanctions and criminal referrals? Can the Republican Party keep defending someone who acts this way in court? Those are the questions everyone's asking right now. And honestly, nobody really knows the answers because we've never been in this situation before. We've never had a sitting president facing this many serious criminal charges while simultaneously losing his mind in courtrooms and attacking the legal system itself. But here's what we do know. This Mar-a-Lago case isn't going to disappear. The evidence that was withheld, that's going to come out eventually. The lawyers who are cracking under pressure, they're going to keep talking. And Trump's behavior, that's going to keep giving prosecutors exactly what they need to argue that he's someone who thinks he's above the law. And maybe, just maybe, the whole country is about to find out what happens when someone who genuinely believes they're above the law runs headfirst into a legal system that disagrees. Because that collision is coming. It's inevitable at this point. And when it happens, it's going to be historic. We're talking about potential consequences that could reshape American politics for a generation. We're talking about questions of presidential power, accountability, and whether anyone, even a sitting president, is truly above the law. Those are massive, fundamental questions. And Trump's courtroom meltdown just moved us one step closer to having to answer them. So yeah, stay tuned because this story is far from over. In fact, it's probably just getting started. We'll keep tracking every development, every courtroom moment, every new piece of evidence that surfaces, because if nothing else, Trump's legal battles are proving one thing: the drama never stops, and neither do we. This is the kind of moment that defines presidencies, that shapes legacies, that changes how we think about power and accountability in America, and we're watching it happen in real time.